All right, let's officially kickstart. Very good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are in company of Muath, who was an ex-Careem in-house entrepreneur and is now an angel investor. And we are thrilled that you're here with us today for this fireside chat. So we suggest to start the first half of today's session with a fireside chat discussion to learn about Muath's parkour, Muath's journey. And then on the second half, we will open the floor for any questions you may have specifically for Muath. And in the meantime, by all means, do feel free to use the chat. It will be monitored and we will make sure that we address all questions. So Muath has been involved for a very long time in the entrepreneurial scene within the Gulf region. And during his 3 years tenure at Careem, he was a general manager. And he did left a significant mark by realizing some of Careem's strategic goal by having a growth of GMV to 400 million in Saudi Arabia. And now currently Muath is an active angel investor in the Middle East and Pakistan. And he is particularly intrigued by startups creating waves of disruption. So far, he has invested in over 30 companies, and he firmly believes that investing his time and resources into the talents and aspirations of entrepreneur in the region really makes a difference. So, Muath, really warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Melanie. It's a pleasure to be with you.
So to kickstart, can you please share a bit with us your background and your journey as an entrepreneur at Careem, and how did you move from being an in-house entrepreneur at Careem to being an angel investor as per your role of today?
Yeah, so I did spend close to 6 years at Careem. So I started out as a general manager in Saudi Arabia. So I spent 3 years doing that, essentially growing the Saudi market, and on the supply side as well as on the demand side, as well as managing the regulator. So that was quite a journey. And then, after that, I actually wanted to shift gears a little bit, and I went towards the product side of the organization. And that's, when I ended up moving from Saudi Arabia to Dubai, becoming, part of the product team, having worked on multiple products within Careem. And that actually led to me becoming an entrepreneur in residence at Careem after Careem was acquired by Uber, because this was a time of shifting strategies where Careem wanted to transition from a ride-hailing app or ride-hailing company to a super app, which is something that we currently hear and see often in the market from various players. But essentially going from a single service provider, which is ride hailing, to like offering food, payments, groceries, and all other on-demand services. So that was the reason why I ended up becoming an entrepreneur in residence. Now, after having served 6 or so years at Careem, I decided that it was time for me to do something different. And little did I know that because I did leave Careem in January of 2020, and I did not know that February 2020 was going to be a very interesting month, thanks to COVID. And, it was actually interesting, COVID was, at least, because it kind of unveiled this boom in the tech ecosystem across the region, right? And, prior to that, I'd only made maybe 3 angel investments prior to leaving Careem, but those were quite random and unstructured, unplanned investments. But as COVID led a lot of people to start building technology startups in the region, I was getting approached from many of them, and many of whom actually were ex-Careem colleagues as well. And slowly, I started entertaining those pitches that I received, and I started investing in some of them, and I grew to like it. And the rest is history. I've been investing since 2020, and I have completed over 30 investments across the region, mostly between Saudi Arabia and the UAE.
That's fantastic. What a journey.
Yeah.
And would you say that there are specific challenges or success from your time at Careem that influenced your approach to investing in startups today?
Yeah, so I think the journey that I just mentioned, so being a general manager, then being a product manager, and then taking the role of an entrepreneur in residence really allowed me to see the company from completely different viewpoints, right? And so that really allowed me to see what does how does an organization work from different angles. Like when you're a general manager, you're really looking at the commercial side of the business, the legal side of the business, the P&L management, and obviously building a team and all of that. On the product side, you're looking at the technical side of the business, right? You're trying to analyze how well is the product doing, how do you build new features that customers want and would improve your main KPIs and so forth. And then the last piece, which is being the entrepreneur in residence, we were mainly focused on the future strategy of the business. How do we transform the company from being a single service provider to a multi-service provider app? So I think having seen these different experiences really allowed me to, at least when I engage with founders, that I am able to relate to different parts of their businesses rather than just being focused on one. And there's nothing wrong with, I think, being like a focused investor in the sense that you have investors that really understand the tech stack part of the business, or investors that really understand the operational part of the business. But in my personal experience, I am able to holistically digest a business from various angles.
That's quite an advantage to have had those different roles. It really allows you to have a holistic view. And what would you say that when evaluating a mobile app startup, are the specific attributes or quality that you are looking for?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's always, especially, I mean, it depends really when you're evaluating a company, it really depends uh, at which stage are you evaluating that company. So I think for the sake of our conversation, and also given that most of my investments happen very early on, so I'm usually investing in the pre-seed or in the seed rounds. Um, and in those cases, you're really making a bet on the people. So for me, it's always a question about how strong are the founders? How much do I buy into their story and their vision and what they want to do? And obviously their capability to deliver what they want to deliver. So I think for me, I would say it's 90% founders and 10% everything else, because you could have the best idea, you could have the biggest market, and you could have all other supporting factors. But if you don't have the right team, I mean, the right team is a very stretched term as well, obviously, but what you believe is to be the right team, because investing at the end of the day is really about building conviction. I mean, at the end of the day, investors are people that make up their minds based on their own intuition, based on their own experiences and so forth. And then they make a decision. They say, yes, I want to invest in this company, or I don't want to invest in this company. So it is very conviction driven process. It's not as scientific as, you know, some people maybe think it is. So team is very important. And when we look at team or founders, even if it's a solo founder or, you know, a bunch of founders, you want to, I mean, personally, I like to look at, you know, the chemistry between the founders. How well do they work together? I like to really understand if there's any common history between the founders. Had they worked together before? And then obviously in terms of skill sets, do they have any compatibility? Does one focus on the business? Does the other focus on you know, the technical aspect of the business? Or do they both have the same exact backgrounds? So these are kinds of the kinds of questions we look at. And then obviously, especially if you don't know the founder personally, like you're getting an inbound, you know, pitch from someone you've never met before, you obviously want to understand how well they communicate and how well does their story throughout multiple touch points with that founder, how well do their story carry forward, right? Especially as you challenge it, as you push back, and as you ask tough questions. And then lastly, I would say you want, when it comes to the team, you want a team that really believes in their vision, in their what they're doing, in their mission. So they're not, you know, like they're not doing it for some silly reason. So some people, they will be only financially motivated. That's a big issue for us. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being financially motivated. I think you should be, but it cannot be the sole driver for why you're doing something, right? Similarly, you know, sometimes people will do things for, you know, because they're upset at some past experience, or so you just want to make sure that, you know, the motives as to why they're doing something is very strong. And the reason is because throughout the journey, so many things will go wrong that if you're not so attached to the driving force behind why you're doing this, you're going to give up easily. And, you know, if you give up or you decide to give up, then the whole company goes bust, and so does our investment.
Thank you. I see some hands raised. Please hold on to your questions. We are in the fireside chat portion with Muath, and then afterwards we will absolutely open the floor for you to ask your questions specifically for him to answer. So as a follow-up question, I'd be curious to know that from an ideation perspective, what are the advice that you would give to people who are at the ideation stage, at the seed stage or pre-seed stage that you mentioned earlier? So what would be the advice that you would give for them to transform their idea into a functioning, marketable mobile app?
Yeah, that's a tough one. There's actually a beautiful article written by Paul Graham, who's the founder of Y Combinator, which is one of the most successful accelerators in the world. And the article is titled How to Get Startup Ideas. And I highly, highly recommend that anyone at the ideation stage go read that article. But in summary, Paul believes, and I tend to agree with him, that most likely than not, it is very hard and almost impossible to ideate an idea for a company to, you know, get it started. And the reason is because and it kind of builds on the earlier point I mentioned. Companies, or at least successful companies, should be built for a very strong motive. And usually it has to be a personal motive. And so if I tell you now, if I sit with you and I give you 10 fantastic ideas, you may like one of them, but if you go ahead and decide to do it, there's very little emotional attachment that you have towards that idea, which means that, after a little while, you're going to get bored, you're going to get, tired, you're going to get fed up with it, and you're just going to move on to the next idea. So I'm not big on, and I know that there are people who disagree with that view, and that's fine. In fact, Careem was started in an ideation format, right? The founders had quit their jobs and they wanted to build a company, but they didn't know what they wanted to build. So they essentially looked at, they did some sort of an industry analysis by looking at different industries and saying, okay, what are the issues here and there? And then they landed on building, a limo or like a taxi-like service. But essentially, in my view, the way I look at that story is both of the founders were consultants that were traveling across the region, and they ended up solving a problem that all consultants were facing. So it was a problem that they had encountered and they knew so much about. It wasn't, just an idea that fell from the sky. So that's my take, honestly. I would highly recommend people read the article. And yeah.
Thank you. We will make the article available on our learning platform Housepace, along with the recording of the session, so everyone will be able to have a look and a read. And continuing on the Careem topic, what would you say are some of the most critical factors that contributed to Careem's success? And how could these lessons be translated into successful strategies for startups?
Yeah, so I think this may be counterintuitive, but I think ignoring competition is a very critical lesson I have learned myself. I mean, you see this often when someone wants to launch a company, the first thing they do is like they check if someone else is doing the same. And then they check how much money they've raised, and then they start checking, what their product is doing and so forth. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong, especially if you're about to start. But once you've started and you've committed to building something, I think it is a waste of time and effort and a lot of mental drainage to actually focus on your competition. Because, and I remember this very vividly, I remember when we were in Saudi, maybe around 2016, there was when Careem and Uber started to first make some headwind in the market, then a lot of local investors and other companies, they thought that that was a lucrative opportunity and they wanted to jump in on the ride-hailing market. So they wanted to build Careem-like, Uber-like apps. And these apps are not very difficult to build, right? So everyone was building one and they were launching them. And I remember, because I was in charge of the market, I was getting quite paranoid because all of a sudden there was like 15 apps on the market. And I was super worried that we're gonna, have to compete with all of them and what's gonna happen and all of that. And, I remember that some of my colleagues, they were quite relaxed about it. And, I remember our CEO was like, let's just keep, focusing on growing and building the right things and all of that. And he was absolutely right. 2 years later, none of them survived. They all shut down. And we continued to grow and do well in the market. Obviously, there's a number of reasons why that happened. But essentially, had we spent too much time and effort, focusing on what they're doing and how they were doing it and so forth, we would have probably lost a lot of potential. So I think you have to stay true to what you're building. You have to stay true to your customers and not be too bothered down by your competition. You still have to know what's happening, but I wouldn't spend too much time and effort on that, to be honest. So I think that's one. I think two is, along the way of building a company, you will experience so many hurdles. And I know this sounds theoretically, everyone expects that, oh yeah, building a company is going to be difficult, so I'm ready for it. But essentially, sometimes you will face the kinds of hurdles that will essentially signal to you that you have to shut down or you have to completely pivot. And I think what differentiates, successful companies from not so successful companies is how they react to these situations. I think it pays well to be very stubborn and to not be reactive all the time. So if I recall, from our experience at Careem, at least in Saudi Arabia, we, for the longest time, did not have the right licensing in the country, and a lot of times we were told, to shut down by the regulator in some shape or form. Now, one way to deal with that situation is to say, okay, well, the regulator says so, so we have to do this. Thank you very much, and you walk away. Another is to be stubborn and go sit with the regulator, convince the regulator otherwise, make a case, do everything you can to just change that reality. And that's exactly what happened. It took us more than 2 years of lobbying and talking with the regulator until the regulator finally issued new regulation for our industry, right? But during those 2 years, those were probably the most two difficult years of my life because we were under constant threat of being shut down, and then everything you're doing could just disappear in a moment's time, right? So I think how you respond to these hurdles is very critical. Staying stubborn and true to what you really want to achieve and build, I think is very important. And lastly, I think the funniest thing about Careem is that we had so many open roles all the time. And the reason was obviously we were growing, so we were constantly hiring, but also our bar for hiring was really high. And not only that, we also did not have the right financial, at least cash incentives to hire the best people. So we wanted to hire the best talent at, sub-market prices. And the philosophy was that we were not going to get people because they were going to get a pay raise from their existing job. That's a weak reason to have people join your organization. You never want that person to join you, right? You want someone to join you because they can associate with what you want to build, with what you're doing, and hence they're willing to actually either move at the same pay or even take a slight pay cut because they are so much more excited by what they're going to be doing with you versus what they're currently doing. And so I think that is super critical to always bring on what you believe are the best people you can bring. A lot of companies I see, they will open up a job post. They obviously everyone starts out by saying, I want to hire the best. But then, they find that the best are either too expensive or, they're unable to attract them for whatever reason. And then they start lowering their criteria because they want to be realistic. And that's, I mean, you cannot fault them for doing that. That's normal. That's what any reasonable human being would do. But that's not how we did it. We had so many open roles and we had people double hatting a lot of roles. I remember, for example, our Saudi Arabia marketing director role was open for 2 years. So for 2 years, we did not hire somebody. We were constantly interviewing people, but we just never felt that we found the right person. And so to keep a role open for 2 years while still having the business grow and, obviously other people chipping in and, covering ground for that role is something that I believe is very critical. It just shows the commitment that if we don't find the right person, we're not going to fill that role, no matter what.
It all goes back to the people. It all goes back to the team, like you said at the beginning.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
And from your investor perspective, we would love to know what are some of the common pitfalls or mistakes that you have seen in mobile app startups, and how can those pitfalls or mistakes actually can be avoided?
Yeah. So I think since you asked specifically about mobile apps, I would say one is it is very difficult to build a mobile app if you yourself, the builder, don't know how to build one or have never been part of building one, or at least have a team member or a co-founder or a partner that knows how to do that. We meet a lot of people who have strict business or non-business backgrounds, but non-technical backgrounds that want to build apps. And that's fine. But you have to find the right partner that can help support you on this journey. I have seen so many people outsource building the app to an agency or some developers or some freelancers on some, international website only so that 3 months later they end up losing all of that money and they realize that the project that they hired these people for was not delivered in an appropriate manner because of their lack of knowledge about how should an app be built, how should it be architected, what kind of services, databases, and what have you that they should have in place. So I think that to me is an absolute red flag. If the team has no technical background and they're trying to build a technical product, chances are that doesn't mean there are no exceptions. There are exceptions to every single thing, I will say, right? But do you want to be do you believe you're the outlier or do you believe you're more in line with normal distributions? That's
Mm.
up for you to decide.
And thank you. That's a very valid point that you're making here. And this is why, as part of App Olympics, as per the nature of the competition, we have an official tech partner, Builder AI, and they are on board from the very get-go, from the very beginning. They are available to mentor. They've done a lot of tutorials and master classes to introduce the technicalities of building an app from the very get-go, from the prototyping. So thank you. Absolutely.
Okay, that's
And
awesome. That's great to hear.
we'd love to hear a success story if you can share one for a mobile startup that you've invested in and highlighting some perhaps of the traits or the qualities that set them apart and that contributed to their success.
Yeah. So personally, I don't do a lot of B2C investments simply because one, they are very expensive. They tend to be very expensive companies to grow. And two, the chances that they actually succeed are also, in my view, quite minimal. However, I have done a few, and one of them is called Noon Academy. It's a Saudi Arabian startup. It's an edtech startup for high schoolers, and they've recently raised $43 million for their Series B. And if I recall correctly, they have some 3 million active students on their platform every month across 10 plus countries. So that's probably, a very good success story in terms of, a mobile app, because it's a mobile app only company. Now, what I have noticed, because I've invested with them for 6 years, um, what I have noticed is that over these 6 years, they've done about 5 to 6 product iterations. It took them a long time for them to really land at what seems to be a working product, or a product that has product market fit. So they were relentless at, just keep experimenting with different solutions, and staying super close to their customers. And again, back to the point we were discussing earlier, they had faced so many hurdles, right? That they could have simply just said, you know what, it's not working. Thank you very much. But they didn't, because they genuinely believed in the product that they were building, and they stayed very close to their customers. And what fascinates me about their story is the core insight for their, what became a product market fit uh, experience for them, was an insight that they learned from their customers firsthand by simply being very close to them. So essentially, they had these like different lessons on the platform for students to learn from. And what they realized by being very close to their customers, who are students, that they were going on FaceTime together. So let's say 2 students, they want to study, but they're too bored to study by themselves. So they would go on a FaceTime, have their friend in the background while they both study together, right? And they also used other apps like Snapchat and so forth. So they were basically having a video call without necessarily talking throughout the journey. It's not like they were talking, but they just wanted to have each other's company in the background. And that insight, and being able to witness that maybe 5, 6 years after the company was founded, that led to a revolutionary, overhaul of their product. And today I think they're in a good place.
Thank you. One last question, if we may, before we open the floor to our participants. We'd love to know, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs looking to build a successful mobile app and attract investment?
Yeah. So I think one is share your idea with as many people as you can. Talk about it as much as you can with everyone. Um, because, I mean, you will definitely hear a lot of noise, and you will hear a lot of negative feedback. Oh, this cannot be done. Oh, this is impossible. Oh, this has already been done, and so forth. And it is very difficult to know which feedback to filter through, which feedback to completely ignore, and which feedback actually can be monumental for what you're doing. But generally speaking, I would share your idea with as many people as possible, get as much feedback as possible. Now, at the same time, and this goes back to the question of how do you ideate, the answer here is, you always want to be building the product for you, right? It really has to be something that you're personally excited about building. It's something you believe should exist, and you would personally use, or someone in your life who is very close to you is in desperate need of that product. So this is kind of like a litmus test for like, should I really be building this if I don't know anyone who will absolutely jump on this? Ideally, it's you. If it's not because of, whatever reason, then maybe it's someone you know very, very well. That's not being, kind to you. That's someone in genuine need of this product. And that takes us to the last point. If you are the user or someone else is the user, and you know them very well, you want to get them to use it as soon as possible. So let's not over-engineer. Let's not, make it perfect. If someone is in desperate need, they will use any kind of product that will satisfy that basic need. And then you can beautify it over time, make it look better, nicer, smoother, have all the right integrations and so forth. And that's a good way to know whether you're actually solving a real problem, a real pain point for people versus, it's a nice to have problem for people if they actually jump on it or not.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Fantastic insights. Thank you for sharing your expertise with us and with the Apple Olympic participants. We would love to open the floor for questions. Amna, you had a hand raised earlier. Would you like to kickstart the question round? Okay, maybe not Amna, maybe someone else.
Yes, maybe may I ask a question, please, for Mr. Muaz?
Please.
Yes, Mr. Muaz, I'd love to ask you, I love to welcome you, and we're really proud to meet you here. And thank you to be with us. My question is, if we have applications, and this application can be some transactions between many countries or different countries, like between Saudi Arabia or Dubai, it can be like to be easy.
I'm not sure I understood the question. Thank you, Ahmed, but I'm not sure I understood the question, to be honest.
Okay, I will explain. If I want to, like, I am in Dubai, and um, already the app created in Dubai and everything in Dubai, but I want to pay to something in Saudi Arabia or another country.
Yeah.
It's easy as a transaction between all of this finance.
Yeah, I think it's possible. Like, you have to choose the right payment gateway provider. But yeah, it is definitely possible to have cross-country transactions. Yeah.
Uh, uh, I mean, like percentage for the profit, it will be too much or it's easy.
It depends from one payment gateway to another. You will have different fee structures.
Yeah.
But it is possible. On average, you have to account for maybe 3 to 3.5% for financial transaction fees, I would say.
Great. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Maz.
Thank you. Before we go to HP, who raised a hand, we have a question in the chat from Tika, who says, what would you advise a startup whose product fits in two regions, namely the GCC and Africa, considering the current market and the speed at which developments are happening?
Look, I don't have much view into the African market, so I cannot comment much on it. I was actually recently in Algeria and visiting one of the cool startups there. I was quite impressed. They've built a unicorn out of Algeria. It was quite impressive. But I think if you're based in the GCC, and I'm assuming you are, it's always best to start in the country where you're based because you have so much leverage. You know people, you know the regulation, you can speak with the regulator, you understand the basic processes in that country. And then you can slowly roll out your product to other markets. Uh, Now, in terms of Africa specifically, there are other economic challenges, that you have to also be considering. A lot of African countries are experiencing currency devaluations, and we are seeing, that affect a lot of startups in Egypt and other places as well. So that's something to consider. But anyways, I would start with where you are. And if things pick up and do well, then you can expand to other markets. There's another question about the average angel check size from Rakesh.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think the average angel check size is probably in this region at least is $50,000. It can go up or down. So it's usually, you can have checks that are as small as 25K and as big as $200,000. And there are absolute exceptions. There are times when, people will just jump in with 5 to 10K, but that usually means that they're not necessarily, you know, full-time angels, or at least like they're not taking this very seriously. They like to throw small checks here and there with friends and family, and that's fine. So it really depends. But I mean, you're looking at 5,000 to 200,000 is the range, but I would say the median has to be $50,000.
Thank you. And HP, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello.
Yes, the floor is yours.
Um, so I want to thank Mr. Muath for this insightful advice. So I have a question that I want to ask him. It's regarding attracting investors. So I want him to share some insights on attracting investors, actually specific to the public safety technology sector.
Which sector?
Public safety.
Public safety.
Yeah.
To be honest, I cannot particularly comment on public safety. I've never invested in it. I don't understand it. However, I mean, when it comes to investors in general, investors at the end of the day, they're looking to see, like I said earlier, I think at the earliest of stages, they want to see a strong team. So it's about how you carry yourself, how you choose your co-founders, who your team is, and how do you conduct yourselves to the investors. And one gateway of you conducting yourself towards the investors is your pitch deck. How clear is your pitch deck? How articulate is it? Is it, I mean, right now there are so many guidelines as to how to write the perfect pitch deck. So do you
Yes.
follow these guidelines or not? I mean, it's very easy for investors because you have to think about from an investor's perspective. They see, like, an average full-time investor will see 20 to 30 pitch decks a week, right? So you can quickly assess how serious, these founders are, because have you taken the time to really optimize this pitch deck so that, it takes away a lot of the noise? Or are you outsourcing this to me? Meaning you could still be working on the best thing ever and you could be the best team ever, but you're not willing to invest the time to make, the communication between us, aka through the pitch deck, as seamless as possible. And that says a lot about the team. So that's one thing, like, how do you conduct yourself? How do you communicate with the investor is very critical. And then two, obviously you want to speak to the investor that has interest in what you're offering, right? So some investors will only want to work with fintechs. Some investors, so actually doing some research, understanding who your investor is, be it a VC or be it an angel, is super critical. Because if someone reaches out to me and says, hey, I have the best, I don't know, biotechnology startup, like I don't invest in that. I don't understand that. So why are we having this conversation? Similarly, there are areas that I'm very interested in that I would love to hear from founders about. So I think that also is very critical. And then lastly is how far have you gotten on your journey? Obviously, the more progress you can show, the more likely that the investor is going to respond and entertain that conversation. And that's one of the things I really dislike, is that a lot of founders, or some founders, not a lot, they wouldn't want to do anything until they raise the money. So they just have a pitch deck, they have the idea, they have some financial model, but they wouldn't want to invest their own time and their own resources until they close some sort of funding amount. And
So
that really is a very negative sign, to be honest.
all right,
Thank
thank you.
you.
I have a second question. Can I ask?
If you don't mind, we have so many hands raised. We're going to give the opportunity to someone else, if that's okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. It's interesting, Muath, that you mentioned about the pitch, because we've had many masterclass around how to create a pitch deck, how to present your pitch, because next week on Tuesday, the 30th of January, is the deadline for the participants to submit their 4-minute recorded pitch, showcasing their pitch deck and also their app prototype. So spot on. We have a question from Paskov. If you want to unmute yourself, please.
Yes, so my question is related to one sentence that you said, that it's better to share our idea with as many people as possible. But at the same time, if we share our idea with 20 people, 10 of them might say, okay, it's a very good idea. 10 of them might say it's not a good idea. And unfortunately, in the beginning, we might hear more of this, like that it's a bad idea. So how to stay positive and how to, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a very critical one. And I did mention that it's very difficult to filter the feedback, because you don't want to take every piece of feedback seriously. Because if we did that, no one would have ever built anything, because most people will have negative views, especially of new ideas. I think it is about qualifying the feedback. Who is saying this? And potentially even reading a little bit into it. Why are they saying what they're saying? So for example, I remember, just to give you an example, when I first joined Kareem, I sat down with the head of the taxi lobby in Saudi Arabia. And he was insanely pessimistic about what we were doing. And he, was saying, this is never going to work, this is going to fail, and so forth, right? So, I mean, this feedback I know is biased. I know that this person has an ulterior motive, so I would completely disregard it. And so, yeah, you have to qualify the feedback. You have to qualify the feedback. But it's very tricky, I tell you, because sometimes you want to stay true to your idea. You want to, you want to proceed, you want to build what you're building. But at the same time, sometimes you are getting super valid feedback that you have to really consider. So how to know which is which? Honestly, I don't think there's a science behind it. You just have to exercise your best judgment. And judgment is critical in this journey. Having good judgment is very critical.
Thank you. Jack Olo, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, hi guys. So thanks first of all for all the information. I have two questions. The first is, at what point would you typically consider investing in a startup? At what point of their growth in terms of, let's say, monthly active use, number of users, revenue being generated, that kind of stuff? Second is, given as an investor, I'm assuming when you're investing in a company, you typically have a point at which you would like to exit. I'd just like some perspective from you, what those exit points usually are. And I mean this with regard to time. At what point of all the experimentation a company goes through would you typically require the founders to either give you back your investment or whatever other arrangements you typically have? And I think this is important because in some markets, it takes quite a while before a company actually gets to a point where they have consistent profits above whatever costs or expenses they have, and relative to all the high margins angels and venture capital usually expects.
Okay, so a bunch of questions. So one is, when do I decide to invest? It's really different because every company has different metrics, right? So the best metric I like to see, obviously, is revenue. Is the company generating revenue? Is that revenue growing week on week or month on month? And what does that revenue, look like? What are the sources of that revenue and so forth? Along with obviously, metrics that relate to the cost of that revenue. So, okay, let's say the company is generating, I don't know, $50,000 a month. At what cost are they generating that revenue? Are they, having to spend $200,000 or are they spending, $50,000? So that's critical. And then you want to understand, what does engagement look like? So even early on, are the people that are using the service continuing to use the service at a good frequency? And then are they coming back to use it 1 or 2 months later? So those are like the most critical questions and decision factors that we have, or that I personally like to rely on. Now, when it comes to your other question, what's my time horizon and when would I like to exit and so forth? This is a very tricky one. I think a lot of investors, at least ones that are serious, they should be coming in with a mindset or a time horizon of 10 plus years. And that's personally my time horizon is 10 plus years. However, there are, situations in which, I've made an investment, and after interacting with the team and looking at their progress 1 or 2 years down the line, I noticed that they're not necessarily the right team. I made the wrong decision in investing in this company. And in those cases, I would seek an exit as soon as possible when it is made available. For the most part, no investor can ask the founder to give them their money back. I wish that was an option. I wish that was an option. It is not. So all you can hope for is that somebody will come and offer to buy you out. This is usually a VC that will have so much appetite for that particular business. One of the funniest exits I had was I had a 3x exit 6 months after I invested in a company. And another VC wanted to buy my share out, and I sold it. But I sold it not because it was 3x, and not because I thought it was the right time to exit. I realized after 6 months that I made the wrong decision. And so I was actually happy to take my money back, but I was lucky to get this offer. And, I made 3x in 6 months. The counter opposite, the opposite has happened with me recently. There's this company I invested in 5 years ago, and we received an exit offer from another VC at 22x the original investment. And I decided not to sell because I believe that the company is going to be a lot more valuable in the future. So in general, if your investors don't want to exit, that's probably a good thing that's happening. And they generally should be having a 10-year horizon.
Thank you so very much, Muath. It's been fantastic to talk to you about your journey, starting from the general manager at Careem to an angel investor. Lots of fantastic insights and expertise you've shared with the App Olympic participants. For those of you who have raised your hands or asked question in the chat, unfortunately, time is not permitting for us to answer those questions, but we will upload the recording of this fireside chat on Housepace, and on Housepace you will have the link as well to the article that was recommended by Muath, and there will be a forum where you can enter your questions specifically in regard to this fireside chat. Thank you very much, Muath, for your time. It was an absolute pleasure hosting you this afternoon.
Thank you, Melanie, and everyone who attended. I hope this was useful in any shape or form.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Until next time, happy learning.